All right. Hello, Mr. Ippolito's class. This is Mr. Ippolito. I'm just confirming, just verifying. There we go. I see my face there. So that lets me know that this is working successfully. Hello, and good evening. Happy Thursday evening to you. It is Thursday, right? Yes, Thursday. And we are now ready for Mr. Ippolito's 7th grade world history class. This is our final exam review. And we're going to go ahead. I'm looking down here just to make sure that we got. Hello, Bailey and Rick Ross. I'm not sure who that is, but hello. And so for those of you just joining us, welcome. Hello, Bailey. Hi. If you want to check in, just let me know, because the only way that I know that you're on is if you put add something in the chat, then I can give you a little shout out. Okay, so here's the way it's going to work. I'm going to go ahead and hopefully you have questions for me. Brandon DeVore, hello. And oh, Sebastian, hello. So if you have questions for me, then you should put them in the chat, because the things that you are wanting to know the most about, I know everything there is to know about 7th grade world history. So I want to know what you would like to know about. Nathan Conrad, hello, Nathan. Nathan, by the way, this is 7th grade review. But if you want to hang out and review some 7th grade history, Nathan, you're welcome to. And hello to Chloe. All right, so here's how it's going to work. I'm going to go ahead, like I said, I'm just going to start going over terms, and then I'm going to be I'll be monitoring the chat. So if you would like to ask something specific, then, because I know that there's no way we're going to be able to go over all 60 vocabulary terms that I put on your study guide in 1 hour. It's impossible. So what we need to do is you need to tell me via chat. And if your chat isn't working, or for whatever reason, you also have my cell phone number is located on my website if you need that. So you could text me so I can receive text messages, and the YouTube live chat. That's the best way to get those questions into me. All right. And then I think we're still trying to get Mr. Hahn to join us. I think he's working on that right now. So maybe he'll jump in and join us a little bit later on. In the meantime, what I'm going to do is I am just going to get right on our study guide. I'm looking at our Q4 final exam review study guide. And if you want to take a look at that, let's see if I can share my screen with you. And I'll hit share. And okay, so this is what we're looking at right here. This is, these are all 60 terms. And this is potentially what your final exam is going to be on. Now, I should let you know before I go any further that yes, the final exam is going to be like, these are really good terms to learn and to review. Will the entire final exam be based on all of it? Like, is it possible there's something else that's not on the study guide might appear in the final? Sure, it's possible. But for the most part, what you see here on the study guide is what I'm using to base the final off of. Okay. I noticed that Elijah has just joined us. So hello, Elijah. Welcome. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through these terms, and then as you, if you have questions, then give me a holler. I'm going to stop doing that screen share so that you can see my face again. All right, so I'm now going to, we'll just start with term number one, Jan van Eyck, under Renaissance and Reformation. Bailey, I see your question, and I will get to you in just a moment. So about 2 months ago, at the beginning of Q4 is when we started learning about the Renaissance. Jan van Eyck was the artist that painted the Arnolfini portrait, right? So that Arnolfini portrait was the portrait of the couple, and it was an example of Northern Renaissance art, if you recall. That was it had the mirror in the back of the room, and it had all those really tiny, like we talked about the Stations of the Cross, because Christianity, the Catholic Church in particular, was a huge influence on Renaissance art. So Jan van Eyck was the artist who painted that particular painting. It's possible on the final exam tomorrow that there might be some visual questions. So you might see a piece of art from Leonardo da Vinci or from Michelangelo or from Jan van Eyck, and you should be able to, based on what we learned about in class, you should be able to identify the artist that painted that portrait, or painted that painting rather. Another thing that you should be able to identify, and this is an example of, oh, okay. So number six, the number six term is how to recognize Renaissance art. So a couple things that I might throw at you. Number one is, how do you recognize the difference between medieval art and Renaissance art? You learned about that. Another thing you might be asked to identify would be the difference between Northern Renaissance and Southern Renaissance. So that's a possibility that that may come up. I haven't even finished writing your exam yet. So anything's possible when it comes to the area of Renaissance art. Bailey asked the question, how is the scoring going to work with the team quiz? Oh, so I've already put in the scores for the team quiz. You should have seen those come up in Infinite Campus because I just put them in either at brunch or lunch today. So as I mentioned before, if you are unhappy with the score that you got on your team quiz, I did say, because you were working as a team, that you are eligible for a retake. And if you'd like to do that retake, then you would be eligible for up to the full point amount. So if you want to do that retake, your time is running out. It was a 25-point quiz. And so you could still do that retake. You could either do it tomorrow at lunch. I'll be around tomorrow at lunch. You could also do it Monday at lunch, would be another opportunity to do the retake. And then we're kind of out of time, because on Tuesday, we're all going to be at the bowling alley. On Wednesday, I'm going to be with the 8th graders at Magic Mountain. And then Thursday is a special schedule and there is no lunch. So if you want to redo that quiz, I think it was the MIA quiz, the Maya Inca Aztec quiz, you really have two more opportunities. It's lunch tomorrow or lunch on Monday. All right. Elijah says, I was absent on the day of the Aztec Inca. Yes, so you should, Elijah, you should come take it tomorrow at lunch. Absolutely. And Iman has just joined us. So hello, Iman. All right. So jumping back in now to the Renaissance and the Reformation. So we talked a little bit about Jan van Eyck. He was, like I said, Northern Renaissance artist. You should know the difference and be able to identify Northern versus Southern Renaissance art and what the differences are there. Number two is linear perspective. We learned about Brunelleschi and linear perspective. That was actually just a question in our game a couple days ago, or just yesterday, on linear perspective and Brunelleschi. So linear perspective is that idea that Renaissance artists really kind of for the first time developed that concept where, and you created a video on it for your blog, that when you have lines on a two-dimensional, we're talking about like in a painting or a drawing or sketch, right? On paper or on canvas in a two-dimensional surface, when you have lines that converge, then that's what creates linear perspective. It gives the illusion of depth in a painting. Filippo Brunelleschi was the Italian artist who kind of pioneered that concept. And we spent quite a bit of time learning about linear perspective and Brunelleschi. So that's what you need to know. For numbers 3 and 4, Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, those I would argue, in addition to being a couple of Ninja Turtles, were also the most influential of all of the Renaissance artists. Both are Italian. Leonardo da Vinci, the paintings that he was best known for, the Mona Lisa, the Last Supper. I believe the Last Supper was one of the paintings that you could have chosen when we did that list of 10 paintings that you could choose from. Leonardo da Vinci, in addition to being a painter, was also a sculptor. He was also a scientist. He developed an early concept for a helicopter, which was way ahead of his time in the 1400s. He also studied human anatomy, was a student of the human body, and did a lot of drawings and sketching about the human anatomy. So that's Leonardo da Vinci. Michelangelo, also a brilliant artist and sculptor. Michelangelo probably his most famous work, I would say, would be a couple things. The sculpture of David, Michelangelo's David, which was another one of the paintings that you could have chosen in your study of Renaissance art. The other most famous piece would be the Sistine Chapel, the work that he did in the Sistine Chapel, and specifically the scene that is most, I think, well known and that we discussed in class was called the creation of Adam. It's that scene where God and Adam. It's a scene from the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis, where God has just finished creating, according to Christian belief, God has just finished creating the heavens and the earth and the animals and all of that. And so then on the 6th day, if I'm getting my stories from the Bible correct, on the 6th day, according to Christian belief, that's when he created man, and so he created Adam. And so that's the story that depicts. Okay, There's a question. First of all, Bailey asks, are we going to get a question about art or linear perspective, art or any other? Yes. Yes, please plan on getting art questions because that's what the Renaissance was all about. So plan on getting those. Are we going to add anything else to our blogs? Bailey, I would love to add more to our blogs, but sadly we are just about out of time. So that's going to be it in terms of adding anything else to our blog. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and keep moving on now because I think I've kind of touched on numbers 1 through 6. Like I said, if you have a question, please feel free to let me know, and I would love to answer your specific question. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep going in order. Number 7 is Martin Luther. It's a little out of order. So I'm going to go ahead and why don't I skip down just to the word Renaissance there. I'll go back to Martin Luther when we talk. Oh, and it looks like Martin Luther appears twice. He's number 7 and number 16. Anyway, I'll talk about 8 and 9. Renaissance, the word Renaissance, as we learned about in our game just recently, we reviewed, it means rebirth. And so the Renaissance was this idea that the art practices, the literature, the culture, the architecture of ancient Greece and ancient Rome are being reborn, right? That's what the artists and the writers and the architects of the Renaissance wanted to do. They were trying to recapture kind of like the glory days, or what they thought were the glory days of Europe. Because if you remember from our history, in Western history, you had ancient Greece, and then you had the rise and the fall of the Roman Empire, and then after the fall of the Roman Empire in the mid 5th century, then we have the Middle Ages, right? And so the Middle Ages, according to what Europeans believed at the time of the Renaissance, was kind of this down period, right? Down period for literature, a down period for art. Art in the time of ancient Rome was vibrant. It was sculpture in ancient Rome was realistic, and then during the time of the Middle Ages, there's like this decline in art and sculpture and culture, according to what they believe. So anyway, so that's what Renaissance means. It's this idea that they had romanticized what ancient Greece and ancient Rome were all about, and so they wanted to try to bring that back, right? It was the revival of the everything that they liked about ancient Greece and ancient Rome. Okay, I'm going to pause really quickly. I'm going to talk about number 9, realism, in just a moment, but I have a couple questions that have been coming through. Brandon asks, are we going to have a blog post check tomorrow or Monday? So Brandon, what I'm going to do, being consistent with what I have done in the past for this very last grading period, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make that blog check optional. So what that means is if you have successfully completed all those blog posts, I want you to be rewarded. I definitely want to give you credit for that. So what you would do tomorrow at the conclusion of the exam is I'm going to give you an opportunity to grab a Chromebook. If you have all of those blog posts, all of the ones that are listed in the table of contents, then I will go ahead. I want to give you credit for all of those. If you don't, if you did not keep up with all the blog posts, or they're kind of, some are there and some are missing, whatever, then there will be no penalty if you don't turn in those blog posts. So if that makes sense. So I will check those tomorrow if you would like to turn those in. If you're not quite ready, but you're like, oh, Mr. Ippolito, I really want to turn those in. I want to try to get credit for those. And just keep in mind, it's not extra credit. It's just going to be an enrichment, right? So let's say that I decide to give 15 points for all those blog posts, or 20 points for all those blog posts. It's not extra credit. It just means you're going to get, in the grade book, you're going to get a 15 out of 15 or a 20 out of 20, 100%, which if your grade is lower than 100%, then anytime you get 100% on a thing, then it's going to help you. So I hope that's clear. And if not, then let me know and I can, try to further clarify that for you. But it's going to be totally optional. You won't have to do it. Okay. So thank you, Brandon, for that question. Sebastian asks, how many questions will be on the exam? I think we talked about this in class. My guess is going to be between 40 and 50 questions. So it'll be consistent with other like quarterfinal exams that we've had. Bailey says, are there going to be more multiple choice questions and written responses? Bailey, right now, my thought is I just would like to get this graded as quickly as possible. I want to give you that feedback as quickly as I can. And I think the best way for me to do that is just to make it as much multiple choice as possible. There may be, I don't ever want to rule it out, but there may be maybe 1 or 2 written responses, maybe. That would be, if I did 1 or 2 written responses, that would be easy enough to grade over the weekend. But as of right now, it's going to be all or almost all multiple choice. Iman says, nope, he said that we are out of time now. Iman, I'm not sure what that means. Brandon, he said we don't have time anymore. Oh, okay. I think you're trying to answer Brandon's question. And then Bailey asks, how many points will our blogs be? And Bailey, I don't know that. I can give you that answer tomorrow. Okay. And so then I just see hi and thank you. And hello, Ben. I'll give you a shout out because I see that you're on here now, Ben. Hello. Okay. Getting back now to number 9, realism. And like I said, for those of you just joining us, if you have a specific question, because it's already 7:16, we're 1/4 of the way through the YouTube live event, and we've gotten through 9 out of the 60 on the list. So you can tell we're not going to get through everything on the list. So if you have something specific you want to ask about, please make sure that you ask about it. Okay, getting back now to number 9, realism. So realism is this idea that in the Renaissance, that art, painting we looked at mostly. It's this idea that the painting was much more realistic. It captured, it almost was as real as a photograph, right? And if you take a look at some of that medieval art, remember when we watched the video, we kind of talked about ugly medieval babies. Specifically, we were examining those paintings of the Madonna and Child paintings, Mary and Jesus, Mary, his mother. And in the medieval art, it kind of looks flat. It looks like it doesn't really have depth or dimension. The proportions are kind of off. But then as you get into the Renaissance, there's so much more detail. There's so much more lifelike. There are shadows. There are curves. There's just so much more realism. So number 9, when we talk about the word realism, that's really what we're talking about in reference to the Renaissance and the way that Renaissance art changed in relation to medieval art. And hello, Lainey, and welcome, Lainey, to the broadcast. Okay, number 12, Peter Bruegel. The only thing I really need for you to know, I think I'm kind of jumping around here. I'll just talk about Peter Bruegel, Northern Renaissance artist. Clearly, I'm not speaking much more about him, so probably not going to be as significant of a thing on the final exam. I do want to talk about number 10, the importance of Florence, Italy. I think it is important to note that Florence became the center of the Renaissance, at least the center of the Italian Renaissance. And part of the reason for that, Florence, and I'm going to say to a lesser extent Venice as well, although Florence really was the center of Renaissance art. It's this idea that goes along with number 11, patrons. Part of the reason why Italy becomes the center of Renaissance art is because the Italians, and now I just want to make it clear, Italy is not a country yet at this time. In the Renaissance, in the 1400s, 1500s, 1600s, Italy not yet a country. Italy will not become a country as we know it today until the mid 1800s. But the Italian city-states, they were the ones who were getting very, very wealthy in the 1300s, 1400s, 1500s, getting very wealthy off of trade because they pretty much dominated trade with Asia at this time. When explorers like Columbus and like Vasco da Gama and like Bartholomew Diaz and the other explorers that we learned about in the late 1400s and then the 1500s and 1600s, when they start finding other routes to Asia, they're starting to kind of break up the monopoly that the Italian city-states had. And so by the 1600s, that's when you kind of really see a decline in the wealth, start to see a decline in the wealth of these Italian city-states. But at this time, 1300s, 1400s, 1500s, as that Renaissance art is kind of building to a peak, that's because these wealthy Italian traders and merchants had so much money that they could become, number 11, they could become patrons of the arts, which means they could pay to have just a full-time artist that just paints for them or sculpts for them. So that's where that wealth is going to come from. I would say prior to this system of patronage, these patrons, most of the art is being commissioned. Most art in Europe is being commissioned by royalty, by monarchs, by kings and queens. Maybe lords of the Middle Ages would have been commissioning that work as well. But you're starting to see this like merchant class that is on the rise in the Renaissance, and they're able to pay for this art. Okay, Number 11. All right. So Iman is asking about number 29. What what do you mean in number 29? Do you want us to tell you the definition? Here's what I want you to know, jumping down to number 29, Iman. Here's what I want you to know about the Church of England. So we're jumping into the Reformation. In from the time that Christianity began in 33 AD, when the time that Jesus began the church, right? And he told, this is a little bit of background that I think you learned in sixth grade history. When Jesus told Peter, "You are the rock upon which I shall build my church," and according to Catholic belief, Peter is the first pope of the Catholic Church. At that time, from that time up until the 1500s, the Catholic Church in Western Europe, the Catholic Church is really the only game in town. If you're a Christian in Western Europe, now we really didn't study much the Eastern Orthodox churches, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox. I'm not really talking about them. In Western Europe, Christianity, if you're Christian, you're Catholic. It's just one church that dominates all of it, which is very much a contrast, excuse me, from what we see today. If you drive through Santa Clarita today, you can see a Catholic church, an Episcopal church, the Methodist church, the Baptist church, all different kinds of what we call denominations. Church of England was the first church to break away from the Roman Catholic Church, right? And that was because, pardon me, because King Henry VIII, if you recall from the story, King Henry VIII wanted to, his wife, his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, was not giving him the son that he wanted. He wanted to pass down his crown from, him as the father. Eventually, when he died, he wanted to pass it on to his son. His first wife, Catherine, was not giving him the son that he wanted, and he blamed her. Although you remember studying life science and genetics, and you know that not the man's genes that it's not the woman's genes that even determine the sex of the child. It's the man's genes. Anyway, so he got mad at his first wife, Catherine, for not giving him a son, and he therefore wanted to annul the marriage. I don't know if annulment, if I put annulment on here, I don't think I did. So anyway, the idea of annulment in the Catholic Church is basically declaring that the marriage didn't even exist. So that would give him the ability then to go and remarry. And so he goes to the Pope and he says, "Hey, I would like to break off this marriage with my first wife." And the Pope says, "Well, that's not a good reason. Just because you want a son, that's no reason to end your marriage, to annul the marriage." And so King Henry VIII says, "Well, that's fine. I'm not happy with your decision, but if that's the way you feel about it, then I'm just going to go ahead and instead of breaking away from my wife, I'm now going to break away from the Roman Catholic Church. And I am the head of state of England. And so now I'm going to become the head of the Church of England." And so that's when Church of England begins. Today, if you were to go to England, the predominant form of Christianity in England is Church of England. It's also called the Anglican Church. Here in the United States, the Anglican Church is called the Episcopal Church. It's the same thing. They have the same set of beliefs and kind of the same hierarchy and structure. But that's Church of England. And Church of England begins during the Protestant Reformation in the 1500s. Shortly thereafter, Martin Luther is going to break off from the Roman Catholic Church, and he is going to start the Lutheran Church. And of course, John Calvin starts the Presbyterians or Calvinists, which will become the Presbyterians, and then it's just sort of this domino effect. Once one person does it, once one person breaks away from the Catholic Church, other people kind of look and like, "Oh, so if we're unhappy, we could do that too, right? Oh, I didn't even think that we could do that. I didn't even think that was a thing." So one person started it, and then other people started to break away, and that's what characterizes number 18 and 19, the Protestant Reformation, is this idea that there were people who truly did want to, Martin Luther, when he first started out, he didn't intend to break away from the Catholic Church. He just wanted some updates. He wanted to update some of the church practices. He wanted for people in Germany, that's where he was from, to be able to have church services in their native tongue of German instead of having church services in Latin. At that time, and really up until the 1960s in the Roman Catholic Church, all church services were in Latin. Well, if you didn't speak Latin, then you kind of just trusted that the words made sense. But Martin Luther disagreed with that. And so originally, people like Martin Luther John Calvin. I think they wanted to start off by reforming the Catholic Church and making some changes, suggestions for ways to change, and then that didn't happen. And so as a result, Martin Luther, number 16, we're kind of going through a lot of these. Martin Luther, number 16, wanted to break away. John Calvin, number 21, decided, well, I've got to break away as well. Number 15, that word indulgence is, that was one of the things that Martin Luther had a problem with. If you recall, we learned about this briefly during either the Middle Ages or the Renaissance. It was this idea that you could buy forgiveness. If you had enough money, then you could purchase an indulgence in the Catholic Church at this time, and then your sins would basically be bought off, right? It was this idea that if you were wealthy enough, you could sin all you want because you just paid the Catholic Church to absolve you of your sin. Well, people who are poor or working class, they're like, well, this isn't fair. Why should wealthy people be able to sin and I can't afford it? I can't afford an indulgence, so therefore I can't sin. It doesn't make sense. So that was another reason why Martin Luther. There was a list of the problems that Martin Luther had with the Catholic Church. It was a list of 95 things. He called them the 95 Theses. And if you recall from our activity, he nailed that list of 95 Theses to the door of the Church of the University of Wittenberg. So I think we kind of hit quite a few here in the Renaissance section. If I'm taking a look at the study guide. Okay. All right. So we talked about number 29, and then Sebastian says number 42. And hello to Clara. I'm going to give Clara a shout out there. I'm going to see if anybody else has jumped on. I think Clara is our only new person. So hello to Clara. Okay. Let's take a look now at number 42 is what Sebastian is asking about, Vasco Núñez de Balboa. Here's the thing. So this is in our exploration unit. Not mentioned for very long, but he's important, and here's why. So I'm not sure how much of the story the textbook told you, but I'll tell you the story now. So Balboa was from Spain, and he, like many other explorers of the 1400s and 1500s, Balboa was trying to find a passage to Asia, right? So there were a lot of people trying to find number 46 Northwest Passage. Those were Europeans that were trying to find a way in a ship to go all the way across. There's got to be some waterway where you can go all the way through and get through the Americas and get over to the other side to get to the Pacific Ocean so you can get to Asia, right? Because they're crossing the Atlantic and they got to get over to Asia. Well, there were these two continents that were in the way, North America and South America. So Balboa was one of those people that was trying to find this passage to get to the Pacific Ocean. At the time, though, they didn't even know the Pacific Ocean existed. They only knew of one ocean. They knew the Atlantic Ocean. That was it. In Europe, that was their whole frame of reference. The one ocean that they knew. They knew the Mediterranean Sea. They knew the Black Sea, the Caspian Sea, these other smaller bodies of water in Europe. But the only ocean that they ever knew was the Atlantic Ocean, because they weren't even aware of the Americas at the time. So finally they figure out, and Balboa, the interesting story about Balboa is, so he ends up going, I want to say it's where Panama is today, and maybe El Salvador, somewhere in Central America. And he sails, he makes landfall. He and his crew are crossing over land. And they eventually, as they're crossing over land, right? This is like a narrower part of land in South America, or in Central America, between North America and South America, right there in the narrowest part. And, the Atlantic Ocean, it's so choppy, it's so rough. The seas are really it's tough. As a sailor, it's tough to cross the Atlantic Ocean. But he looks over, he finally gets over this rise and he sees another body of water. And he's like, this ocean, este océano in Spanish, because he's from Spain, right? Este océano es muy pacífico. Pacífico means pacified. It means calm, peaceful. The Atlantic is all stormy and rough water, but el Océano Pacífico, this very pacified, calm ocean, this is a whole different body of water over here. He's the first European, or at least the first that we know of, to actually see el Océano Pacífico. course, we call that the Pacific Ocean, right? That's where the name comes from. It comes from Balboa. He was the first European to see the waters of the Pacific Ocean. He, according to legend, according to the story, named the Pacific Ocean because it was so calm, so passive, so peaceful, so smooth. Okay, so that's number 42. Oh, Mr. Hahn, hello. Mr. Hahn, I see that you're on, and I'm sorry. Are you trying to join in? Oh, Mr. Hahn, there you are. I see you. Hey, it looks like you're muted, Mr. Hahn. Can I unmute you? Oh, yeah, hey, there you are.
Yeah, I muted myself because I didn't want to interrupt. So,
well, Mr. Hahn, hey, welcome. And so, Mr. Hahn, what do you? I'm going to take a little break just because I've been talking for the last, half an hour straight. So, Mr. Hahn, if you were writing this exam, what has stood out to you? Taking a look at the vocabulary, taking a look at kind of thinking, reflecting on what we have learned over the past quarter. What has stood out to you? What do you like? What seems interesting? What should I be putting on the exam?
I don't think I should be the right person for this, but if you're asking, the explorers have definitely stood out. Obviously, due to the game that we've been playing recently, so that I believe that. Well, they're also pretty important because, well, we're talking about the discovery of North and South America here, inadvertently, of course, but still, that's definitely an important factor there. The Renaissance as well. I don't think I was here when y'all covered that. Was I? I don't know.
It was right at the. It was kind of on the crossover between third quarter and fourth quarter.
Okay.
So I think you were just jumping in, maybe I don't know, a couple weeks into fourth quarter, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. So then yeah. Yeah. Okay. So then So the Renaissance is pretty important as well. Differences. What was it? Seeing how. Well, it's Europe coming out of the Middle Ages and medieval times and all that. So definitely important as well. Seeing how there's more written record of history as well, more accurate written record of history throughout that time period as well. And then definitely the Reformation, especially since I saw that video. What was it? The video of the students nailing their 25 theses in the front of the school definitely gives. Definitely sticks out, and also very important in terms of religious history. Oh Lord, what's this? Well, European religious history as well. So just my 2 cents on that matter.
Cool. Well, Mr. Hahn, I appreciate that. I think Bailey just asked the question: is the study guide on your website? And you know what, Bailey? It's funny you mentioned that, because I think the answer is no.
No, it is not. I tried looking for it as well, and it's not there.
Yeah. And so I know that I gave the paper copy in class, but you know me, I'm trying to, I try to always offer a digital copy as well. I think the best way to do this, since I want to, it's time sensitive here. I'm going to go ahead and I am sharing that. So to Bailey and whoever else is interested, I am sharing the digital copy in Google Classroom, so you can get that. And then Mr. Hahn, yes, just because I don't want you to be left out here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share this with you as well. And I'll just share this with you in Google Docs. And Mr. Hahn, you should be seeing that in just a moment. All right. Okay, so, all righty. Hey, let's see. So what, I'm just trying to get back here to where we were. I think we were on number, we were in the 20s now. And okay, I see that Bailey is on. Hey, Bailey, I see that you're on the document now. Oh, you're very welcome. Okay. What's next? I think I want to talk about, I'm going to jump down to number 24, primogeniture. It was a term, gosh, I think it was in the textbook, and I don't know if we really even talked about it much, but it's an important one. So number 24, primogeniture. It is the idea that the firstborn male of the family gets all the good stuff, right? So, for example, in a family of several siblings, let's say there are 6 siblings, boys and girls. When the father dies, all of the land, all of the property is going to go to the firstborn male. That's primogeniture. By the same token, in the monarchy, in the history of European monarchy for hundreds and hundreds of years, primogeniture was also the idea that all of the power, when the king died, that all of the power would go to the firstborn son, which is why King Henry VIII, that was why he was waiting to have that son. Like, he had his first child was Mary, and then his second child was Elizabeth, and then his third child, Edward. I always forget that kid because he just wasn't king for very long. But I think it's Edward until somebody corrects me. I'm just gonna go with Edward.
I believe Edward the second. I think.
I want to say, was it the second? I feel like it was a later. Someone's gonna look it up because we have really smart students in my 5th grade class. Someone's gonna look it up and tell me which Edward it was. I think it was Edward. Anyway, so basically, it was like up until that point in time in England, it didn't even matter for the girls. It was like it didn't matter that Mary was the firstborn because she was Catherine's daughter. It didn't matter that Elizabeth was the secondborn. What mattered was they were all about the firstborn son, and that son was going to get all the power. It was during this time, and part of the reason why we study it, because it was during Edward VI. I see. Thanks, Mr. Hahn. It was during this time when that change happens. When finally in England they say, you know what? Maybe a woman could rule and we would be okay with that. And sure enough, that's when they tried it for the first time in England in the 1500s. First with Queen Mary. It maybe wasn't as quite as a successful experiment as they were hoping. I think she wasn't a crowd pleaser, wasn't a fan favorite in England, Queen Mary, but her half sister Elizabeth. Still to this day, you take a survey of people living in the UK, and who was the most successful monarch, who was the most powerful monarch, who was the most beloved monarch, and I would say that Queen Elizabeth I ranks up there, if not at number one, in certainly in the top 3. Also interesting to note that the 3 longest reigning monarchs in England: number 1, Queen Elizabeth II, who's the current monarch of England; number 2, Queen Victoria; and number 3, Queen Elizabeth I. So the 3 longest reigning monarchs of England, all women, all queens. Okay. Clara, you were asking, did I learn about numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4? Clara, you might have not been here yet when we learned about numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4, but because I know you came later to the class, but they are going to be on your final exam, so be prepared for them. All right, let's get back to the review. Numbers 1 through 29. I think I'm ready to move on since it's 7:39. I'm about ready to move on to the second column, exploration in the Americas. If you're all good with it, and unless I don't see any protests, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to number 30, the spice trade. Here's what you should know about the spice trade. The spice trade was the reason why Europeans started looking for a water route to Asia. It goes back to that monopoly we were talking about earlier in the broadcast, where we were talking about how the Italians, they had control over they basically had a monopoly. Monopoly, in addition to being a very fun board game, is also a term that means when you kind of have domination or control over one industry or one trade, one part of the economy. And the Italians dominated. They had a monopoly over the trade routes between Asia and the rest of Europe. So if you lived in England or France or Spain or any other part of Europe, and you wanted to purchase things like spices or silks or whatever from the East, from China, from India, you had to go through the Italians. You had to go through those Italian traders. That's why they were getting so wealthy. That's why they could afford so much fancy art, is because they dominated that trade. So the spice trade, it was this idea that there had to be another way to kind of break into the market, to lower these costs on these expensive items from Asia. Part of the reason, getting back to spice trade, part of the reason why spices were so valuable and so sought after was the fact that for much of human history, for much of European history anyway, the Europeans did not have access to spices. They did not have access. They had salt. That was basically it. The one seasoning that they had was salt. And during the Crusades, that's when they started to experience for the first time spices from the East. They experienced pepper. They experienced paprika. They experienced cinnamon. They experienced like all of these other amazing spices, peppers and things that like actually make your food taste good. There's no refrigeration until the late 1800s, early 1900s. We did not develop the concept of refrigeration, which means if you kill an animal for meat, today you put meat in a refrigerator, you keep it or in a freezer, and it stays fresh for, or it stays good for a period of days. You can put, if you freeze it right, you can put meat in the freezer for a period of weeks. Back in the day, in the Middle Ages, you kill an animal and it starts decaying. It starts rotting. And so the only thing you could really do to preserve meat was to salt it, right? You could also cure it. That's another, but that still involves salting. It's kind of like salting and sort of cooking it, kind of like jerky, beef jerky. But if you otherwise keeping meat, like meat was kind of after a day or two, you can imagine like leaving meat on your kitchen counter, not putting it back in the refrigerator, just like leaving it on the kitchen counter for a couple of days. It starts to grow mold. It starts to get disgusting. It gets gross. That was what they had. And so to make their meat, their food more flavorful, all they had was salt until the Crusades and Europeans start to bring back these spices. And all of a sudden, like this opens up a whole world for them. So that was one of the big reasons why they wanted to open up these trade routes to the East, was because of the spice trade. All right, I've talked too long about the spice trade. Bailey asks, are we still going to do the team quiz tomorrow, even though we are going to the exam? Let's go over numbers 24, 35, 42, 41. The team quiz tomorrow. If you're talking, Bailey, if you're talking about, are we going to play the game tomorrow, the exploration game? The answer is yes, we're still going to. We're gonna do roughly half of the class. Half the class time will be taking the exam. The other half will be playing the game. If that's what you're asking, Bailey. And yes, I did say we're going to play the game. Yes, so we're going to play the game. Just to be clear, we are going to play the exploration game for the first either 40 or 45 minutes of class. Let's say 45 minutes. We're going to play the exploration game for the first 45 minutes of class. For the last 45 minutes of class, it's the exam. So if I give you between 40 and 50 questions, that's an average of 1 minute per question, which is way more time than you need for a multiple choice. That usually takes a lot less time than that. Okay. What, Mr. Han, we are now, I'm going to go back to you because you are so patiently waiting there.
Yes.
Okay, so Mr. Han, hello. We're taking a look. You see that second column there, right? That second column of the study guide. What of those things do you recall us like talking a lot about, emphasizing? What kind of stood out to you as something that you think on that second column that you feel like you could speak to with some authority or some fervor or enthusiasm?
Oh boy. Let's see. I believe some of these were already covered, like the Northwest Passage and well, not really Christopher Columbus, but Prince Henry of Portugal. Prince Henry of Portugal, aka Prince Henry the Navigator. He was the obviously he wasn't the leader of Portugal, but seeing how he was the son of the king, he was one of those. I believe I don't know if it's the correct term, patron, but he did provide a lot of funding for one. What was it? The naval was it the Naval Academy? I don't want to put out misinformation.
It was a navigation school.
Navigation school.
I want to say the city was Sagres in Portugal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So yes, he put a lot of funding through there. What was it? And then at that academy, at the navigation school, that's where they started developing the most accurate maps, the most accurate navigation tools, such as what was it? And they were teaching their sailors how to use them in order to traverse around the Atlantic Ocean, so that way they didn't get lost. Uh, Tools like the compass and the astrolabe. The astrolabe, you use that to measure what was it, to determine your position at night using the stars. The compass, of course, coming out of China to points north, so you'll be able to find out. Well, if you know where north is, you can find out where east, west, and south are, and uh, and then of course because Prince Henry was such a nice guy and was such a nice guy for this navigation school. They of course called him. Everybody started calling him Prince Henry the Navigator, and and he's one of the primary reasons why Portugal was one of the first to take point, or one of the first ones to start looking for a new travel route to the to Asia in order to get in on that lucrative trade over there, like the spice trade and trading with China, India, in order to break the monopoly that the Italians had.
Mr. Hahn, well said, and definitely, and so also, and I'm glad that Mr. Hahn mentioned this. We're playing the exploration game right now, so yes, I think it would be a good thing to emphasize, to focus on exploration. That's been kind of the most recent thing we've been studying. The Maya, the Aztecs, and the Inca. I think we're gonna see some questions on that as well. And so, but yeah, I'm just getting back to exploration really quickly. I think if you take some lessons from the game that we've been playing, for example, if you're not sure, if the question is, which culture, which civilization during this time kind of took the lead when it came to navigation and navigation technology, if you just think about the game that we're playing, which culture is it that has the advantage in navigation? Well, it's the Portuguese, and I did that for good reason. It's not just just so that everyone would have a little something. It was truly because the Portuguese did have that advantage, and so anyway, it is true to life. Okay, I do want to point to there's one thing I wanted to mention, number 41. And it triggered, my brain was triggered by Mr. Hahn talking about this. So there was, and again, it was in the reading, but I don't think we really talked about it much, but there became a rivalry. And I would say starting in the early 1500s, there arose a rivalry between Spain and Portugal. Spain and Portugal were really kind of vying for dominance in exploring new lands in the Americas, exploring new lands in Africa, and starting to explore new lands out in the islands of Asia, right? What would be called the East Indies. So there are these two terms, the East Indies and the West Indies. The West Indies were the islands of the Caribbean. That's what the West Indies are. The East Indies would be the islands near like the Philippines, the islands off the coast of India, Southeast Asia. Those are the East Indies. It all came from Christopher Columbus, right? Because when he landed in the islands of the Caribbean, he was convinced he had landed off the coast of India. And so that's why he called these people Indians, and he called the islands that he had landed in the Indies. We know better now. Getting back to number 41, though, the Treaty of Tordesillas. Because the rivalry had gotten so intense between Spain and Portugal, who's gonna control what land? They finally got the Pope involved. The Pope, as you know, an extremely important figure in medieval Europe, still an important figure moving into Renaissance Europe, especially when it came to settling international disputes between two countries. And so finally, the Pope had to draw a line, a treaty line, basically down a map of the earth. And the Pope said, all of the lands that are east of this line, Portugal, you can explore those lands. And all the lands that are west of this line, Spain, you can explore those lands. You can still see evidence of the treaty line, the Treaty of Tordesillas. You can still see evidence of this treaty still today on a map of the world, because if you take a look at the lands that the Portuguese settled, it was lands in Africa, and you take a look at South America, and you take a look at that dividing line as it goes through South America. East of that line is the country of Brazil. So Brazil today is the largest Portuguese-speaking nation on earth. Even there are more Portuguese-speaking people in Brazil than there are Portuguese-speaking people in Portugal. It's just like there are more English speakers in the United States than there are English speakers in England. For that matter, there are more English speakers in India than there are in the United States and in England combined. The colony outgrew the original mother country, right? So Brazil speaks Portuguese because the Portuguese settled there. But if you take a look at the map, you take a look at a map of North and South America, Brazil is kind of on the east edge. If you were to take a look at the map to the west of this treaty line, it's all Spanish-speaking countries. So you take a look at the rest of South America, you take a look at Central America, Mexico, all of those countries, almost all of the countries in South America, with a couple of exceptions, they speak Spanish, right? Because Spain got the western half of the Americas, Portugal got the eastern half of South America, and then got claim to all of Africa. So that was what the Treaty of Tordesillas was. Okay. I'm seeing, oh, hello, Ava. Ava, welcome to you. And hello to Zaid as well. I'm not seeing, okay, so Sebastian asked the definition, ALU, is it Bolivia and Peru? And I'm not sure, Sebastian, what that means. But I can tell you that the ALU was that it was the what am I trying to say? It was a system. It was using knotted strings as counting tools. That's what the ALU were. Now it's funny because I'm looking at, and this is a good reason why you shouldn't always Google stuff, because sometimes Google gives you more information than you need, or sometimes incorrect information. So I'm looking at ALU. I'm looking it up in Google, and it's on Wikipedia, and it's a different definition. So that's why you just have to be really careful when you're looking up, especially when you're looking up vocabulary. So, okay. Brandon, I think you asked the question and I ignored you. So I'm going to get back to you now. Brandon asks, are there going to be a lot of vocabulary questions on the exam? Because the study guide only has vocab and important people on it. And then you ask again, is the final mostly vocab or more general ideas? Brandon, I'm going to say it's a combination of both. And here's why. The study guide, the reason why I made the study guide mostly all vocab terms and important people is because these are kind of the central ideas. You need to know more than just definitions. I'll tell you that. If all you do is you memorize these definitions, if all you do is just like you play Quizlet, which by the way, Zaid, thank you for making the Quizlet. But if that's all you do, and if that's all you know, then that's gonna be tough for you, because that's not gonna be enough. All of these things we have, we've learned about, we have written about, we've taken notes on. Like, all of this stuff is stuff that you should know. So I think, for example, the Treaty of Tordesillas, if all you know about the Treaty of Tordesillas was it drew a line that divided this half of the world from this half of the world, if that's all you know, that may not be enough. If you know the story behind the Treaty of Tordesillas and why the treaty existed, then I think that's going to be a much greater help to you, right? Same with number 32, Prince Henry of Portugal. If all you do is memorize, you Google search him and you memorize this like straight up basic definition. If I were to Google search Prince Henry of Portugal and you just look up, and when I Google it, was a central figure in the early days of the Portuguese Empire and the 15th century European maritime discoveries and maritime expansion. Well, that's what Wikipedia says. That's the first part of it. But you have to understand what he was, his importance within the context of what we were learning. Like I said, sometimes Wikipedia, sometimes Google gives you more information than you need, and it doesn't give you the context of like how these items connect with the context of the history that we learned about. Okay. And Sebastian, you were right. The word pampas is from Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Peru. Yes, Sebastian, you are absolutely right. Zaid says some definitions are on my quiz. And Zaid, by the way, I'm going to give you another shout out. And I think, who else gave you a shout out? Bailey and Iman also gave you a shout out. So thank you. So yeah, if you haven't had a chance to check out Zaid's Quizlet, that's on Google Classroom. And so you can pick that up and you can play, I think you can play either on your computer or on your phone. Okay, we have 6 minutes left. Mr. Hahn.
Yes, sir.
Yes. So I'm going to, we have 4 minutes left. I'm going to take a look through the list and see if there's something that jumps out at me. Mr. Hahn, is there anything else in the 4 minutes that we have remaining? Is there anything else that kind of jumps out at you? Or, while I'm kind of kicking it over to Mr. Hahn, students, if you have something else, another question, because we're running out of time. Mr. Hahn, is there a question that stands out to you, or something that, something that kind of stands out in these last few terms that you think might be important, or that you might have a question
on? Number 53, where the word codex, where does that factor into? I don't think I was here for that one. Or if I was, then I do not recall.
So the codex, that is, we learned, and again, it was very brief when we learned about it, but the idea of the codex comes from the Maya. So the Maya developed a system of hieroglyphs, similar to what students would have learned about in sixth grade history with the Mesopotamians or the Egyptians. They developed a system of hieroglyphs, and so they would put them on sort of like the best way I can describe it is kind of like an accordion shaped like paper, and they would use these the codex is the singular, the plural is codices, and so they would use these sort of accordion like shaped books sort of for record keeping. And so that's what the codex was. The idea of in the textbook, when it talks about the Maya and how they developed this codex system, it was talking about record keeping, communication. Not only would they write down like the history of their people, cultural history, but they would also use it. The Maya were very advanced in math, and so they would use it for record keeping, for numbers, and so forth. So that was that.
Excellent.
Yeah. Okay, I'm looking at a little bit of the chatter on the chat, and Iman says Northwest Passage number 46. I want to talk about that, and then Ava, I think you just jumped in late. I spoke a ton earlier. If you kind of rewind and go back after we're all done, I spoke a ton about Vasco Núñez de Balboa. So jump back and you can kind of look at that. And then number 46, Northwest Passage, I talked a little bit about it, but I'll mention it a little bit more. The explorers many of them were trying to find, if you go, like I'm trying to visualize here, the map of the Americas, they were trying to find some place kind of going into, like if you find and I'm totally drawing a blank, where Maryland, Baltimore, Mr. Hahn, help me out, Chesapeake Bay. They would sail into Chesapeake Bay, for example. It was a bay that is on the coast of today, the east coast of the United States, right? And so they would sail in, and they'd be like, "Oh, hey, this has potential." They're trying to cross the Americas. They're looking for a Northwest Passage. They know that they can go around Cape Horn. They know that they can go around. They figured it out after Ferdinand Magellan. They figured out that they could go around the tip of Cape Horn, which is the tip of South America, and they could go and get to the Pacific Ocean and get to Asia that way. They learned that they could, because this was Balboa, they learned that they could get to like Central America, cross over by land, and then get to the Pacific Ocean and then sail to Asia. What they were really hoping for, which would have potentially saved them a lot more time, was if they could find somewhere in what is today the United States or Canada. They were thought that maybe they had some promising locations up in Canada, the St. Lawrence River, up. They're trying to go a little bit further north. If you take a look at the map of Canada, but what happens is once you get up into those islands in northern Canada where it's like real cold and real snowy, you get iced in. And so there is theoretically, if all of the ice in the northern hemisphere is melted, then you could theoretically find, going through those islands, you could find a northwest passage and you could go all the way through like northern Canada. You could get to Asia that way. But the reality is, at least thankfully now, we still have ice caps. And so you can't sail going north. You cannot sail to Asia past the Americas. You have to go south. So that was the Northwest Passage. It was this idea that they were trying to find some way, Chesapeake Bay, St. Lawrence River, somewhere on the east coast of Canada, what are today Canada, the United States, try to find some way to get like a shortcut to get across the Americas. Okay. John Cabot, Ava, I'm not a fan of John Cabot. I don't, so we're number 44, John Cabot, not going to be on your final exam.
All right.
I've decided. I've made that executive decision. Okay, Mr. Hahn, it is now 8:02, and I've been talking a lot. So, Mr. Hahn, any final words that you want to share? Words of wisdom or inspiration or things that stand out to you, things that you think you're expecting on the final before we go?
Well, first and foremost, make sure you get a good night's rest on this, because I mean, if you stay up all night trying to study the material, you'll end up burning yourself out, and then tomorrow morning you'll be racking your brain trying to remember all these terms and whatnot. And then try not to worry too much about it, because remember, you put in work in the classroom as well on this. You know these things. No matter how much you doubt yourself, you always got to have you got to always have confidence in this matter, because what was it? You just gotta have confidence in this matter. So
cool, Mr. Hahn. Well, thank you. I think you were looking at that chat. Looks like Ava is grateful. Bailey as well. Iman is saying yay. So that's got to be a good sign as well. Okay, so Mr. Hahn, I feel like this is a good time, and I will say one more thing. Mr. Hahn reminded me. So I believe tomorrow is a B6 day, which means you got sixth period, and you got homeroom and brunch, and then we've got fourth period, and then we got lunch, and so our class isn't until the end of the day. So if you have any questions, here's what I'm not going to do, and here's what Mr. Hahn is not going to do either. Not going to answer any questions during class, during fifth period, because at that point the test is already completed and we're ready to go. So if you have questions, if you want to just come and hang out and study, you want to borrow a textbook since your seventh grade history textbook is gone, you've already checked it in, stop by my classroom at brunch or lunch. I'm usually in my classroom by about 7 a.m. So if you come early, you can come early, that's fine too. But feel free to stop by before school, brunch or lunch. You just want a quiet place to study, just hang out, get a little final review done. Mr. Hahn and I will be hanging out in the classroom, and we'll be happy to help you. But again, just a reminder, we cannot answer any review test related questions once fifth period has begun. So I'm going to go over the chat one more time. Brandon says, thank you so much. You're very welcome, Brandon. This is the last live of the year, but Iman, hey, so, here's the thing. I'm keeping my fingers crossed, because this year I'm just teaching one class of seventh graders. Next year, I teach 4 classes of eighth graders. So if we get you on Team Amazon, then you will have me as your history teacher again. Whether you like it or not, if you're on Team Amazon, I'm going to be your history teacher. Chloe, thank you so much. You've been watching and taking notes. That's good. Bailey, Chloe, Clara, Iman, Bailey, Ava, Sebastian, Bailey again. Give you all a shout out one more time. Zaid, if you're still around. Brandon, thank you. I think we gave a shout out to everybody. Okay, so Mr. Hahn, thank you for your time. And on behalf of Mr. Hahn, I'm gonna put Mr. Hahn back on there one more time. You can wave to your fans, Mr. Hahn. All right. So on behalf of Mr. Hahn and myself, thank you once again for joining us for the 7th grade history, Mr. Ippolito's Q4 final exam review. Hope you have a great evening. Like Mr. Hahn said, good advice. Don't stay up too late studying and cramming. Just get a good night's sleep, good breakfast tomorrow, and we'll see you tomorrow. Take care. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.